Yeah, Mr. Forbes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for holding this hearing. And gentlemen, you probably heard at the outset I waived my opening statement so that I could spend just a little more time on my questions. And I want to begin by saying that all of you are good men, and you serve with good men and women. I serve with good men and women up here, but sometimes even good men and women can make bad decisions, and that's why we have to have these hearings and we have to ask these questions. And I want to begin my questioning, Admiral, with you, if you don't mind. I want to start by saying that you and I had the opportunity last week to sit down and talk, and I appreciate that opportunity. And I told you then I was going to give you the questions, and I gave you the questions. I said, this is open book exam. This is not to blindside anybody, and I want to just tell you how much I respect you and your service to our country and what the Navy does. But I also told you I had some concerns because we've been asking some questions that the Navy hasn't been responding in their questions. One of the things that I mentioned in the meeting that we had was we were very concerned last year when we didn't receive a shipbuilding plan that the law required, and we didn't receive it based on the statute, but then when the entire Armed Services Committee, through a congressional inquiry, voted unanimously to ask for it, we still didn't get it. When we finally got the shipbuilding plan, there were some discrepancies between the CBO numbers and between the plan itself, and I don't want to talk about the plan today. I want to just tell you that the other thing that happens to us oftentimes is when we do get folks in here, whether it's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or whether it's your boss, the CNO, there's kind of a game, and I'm not saying they play a game, but it's a game that goes on. It's called beat the clock, because we only have 5 minutes to ask questions, and oftentimes that 5 minutes goes by very, very quick, and sometimes the question we ask doesn't get answered and there's no follow-up. So today, the clock's off. No shot clock. We don't have to run it down. Open book test. If you need time, you got your staff there. We'll give you a lifeline. Call the CNO, whoever you want. If I don't phrase the question right, stop me, and because it's not my intention to blindside you or to put anything out on the table. The only thing I ask you not to do is please don't say you'll get back to me, because I don't ever get anybody get back to me when we ask that. And so I want to begin with the question I told you I was going to ask you. It's about Mayport and about shifting a carrier from Norfolk to Florida. And I start with the EIS, which I know you have read, and I'm not going to ask you if you've read it because I know that you have, and I know you've studied it in preparation, hopefully, for this hearing. But I want to read to you what that EIS concluded. It said the rationale for moving that carrier was this: distribution of CVN home port locations to reduce risk to, and then it said fleet resources in the event of natural disaster, man-made calamity, or attack by foreign nations or terrorists. Then the next subheading said carriers, industrial support facilities, and the people that operate and maintain these crucial assets. Now, Admiral, since you are the Vice Chief, you're right under the CNO, I want to start with the one that says natural disasters. And I want to walk through that, and first of all, I want to say I think you and I can agree that as to Norfolk and Jacksonville, we're not worried about earthquakes particularly, at least we haven't had any in any of our lifetimes or our grandparents' or great-grandparents' lifetime. We're not really worried about a tornado hitting there to do that kind of damage, so we're worried about, first of all, hurricanes. And I want to put up a slide up here. It's slide number 1, and if you can't see it, Admiral, I'll have one of my staff members put a poster up here closer to see it. So can you see that okay, or do you want them to put a slide? Sam, can we have a poster put up closer to the Admiral just so he can see what we're all looking at up here? This is from the EIS, and it says that for hurricane risk, no advantage between Norfolk and Mayport. And then Admiral Roughead, when he testified, and again, it was right at the last second buzzer going off, so I didn't get to follow up, he said, they are very, very similar. Mayport fares quite well. And now I'm going to ask if we can put up slide 2. And to the right, with all of those lines, is Jacksonville. To the left is Norfolk. These are hurricanes from 1851 to 2005. Now, Admiral, I want you to just tell me how you can say because when we put these slides up, everybody always laughs. My staff laughs, and they say, how in the world, you can say you're going to disregard hurricanes, but can you tell me today how you can say, looking at those two slides, as to hurricanes, there's no disadvantage to Jacksonville over Norfolk? And again, I told you I was going to put this slide up, so it's not a blind slide for you. Here it is.
Thank you for that question, Congressman, and for the opportunity to comment. The time frame that we looked at, and the slides that I looked at in the study, here we have roughly 150 plus years, 155 years. In the most recent history I looked at, I found somewhere between, over the last 15 years, it was statistically insignificant. That is, the number of hurricanes in Jacksonville, Mayport area versus Virginia. This, as one zooms in and you look at the lines crossing here, it's difficult for me to do when I zoom into Mayport, but I would say just optically, I can't tell that it is all that much. Florida certainly is an issue, but I don't know that Mayport is that much different. I can't tell right now. I'd have to go count the lines. But we looked at this from a risk equaling, if you will, the probability times the consequences. And the consequences of a storm or a natural disaster, far and away, we deem to be a very significant factor in determining this strategic home porting. And we look at it not as a matter of if Mayport or Norfolk, but both. That we think it is important that we have a carrier in both ports because the consequences are that significant.
Okay, now Admiral, when you talk about the percentages you couldn't tell as you zoom in on those lines, you use NOAA as the basis for your probabilities and all when you looked at the EIS. So I'm going to ask that we put up slide 3 now. Show you that NOAA just disagrees with your optical glance at that. NOAA says it's a 75% greater risk in Jacksonville to be hit by a Category 4 hurricane, which is the one that's most probable to do the kind of damage. 58% greater for a Category 3, 47% greater for a Category 5. Admiral, I just, in all due respect, think that you can say hurricanes don't matter. I really don't think it is plausible to say that in this situation, not a significantly greater opportunity that a hurricane is going to hit Jacksonville than it's going to hit Norfolk. I want to go to the next concern that you had in the EIS, though, where you talked about man-made calamities. And I guess one of the things you were worried about is the clumping situation of having carriers all together and some type of calamity that would hit. This chart, and again, I've got one closer for you to see, I guess we don't have the same concerns with our SSBNs because we've only got one base for them in Kings Bay, Georgia, and one base in Washington in Bangor. Or maybe, I guess we have to ask Congressman Dix and Congressman Kinston, they better be careful because we're going to have to break those up. I guess we need to ask Congressman Larson on the EA-6Bs in Whidbey Island because they're all together. We might have to break those up. Or maybe we ask Chairman Skelton on the B-2s in Whiteman Air Force Base because we've got those clumped together. But I want to go again to your man-made calamities and put up slide 5 so you can look at this. This is a 2-scale copy, and again, may be hard for you to see the TV, but you can see from looking at the chart. These are the openings coming into Pearl Harbor, San Diego, and Bremerton, Washington. You can see they're about 1,100 feet shore to shore, 2,000 feet, 2,000 feet. Then put up slide 6, if you would. And in slide 6, the one on the left, 2-scale, is Norfolk. The one on the right is Mayport. Mayport, 1,000 feet, shore to shore. This is the narrowest access, and I know you're well aware of that, being at Fleet Forces Command in Norfolk. It's 4,500 feet from island to island. The shot on the right at Mayport, if I'm bringing in a freighter coming up, it's right off the ocean. You know, when you bring it up Norfolk, you got to come up the bay, and then you got to make that turn to come up the harbor. If a freighter is going down that ocean and turns to come up that channel, what are you going to do? He won't respond to you, and he won't stop on the Mayport side.
Could you, one more time, you're talking about Mayport.
On the right, you look at that channel. It's only 1,000 foot, and that's 1,000 feet, not even the channel. That's 1,000 feet from shore to shore. If you bring a freighter up there, and all of a sudden the freighter turns to come up that channel, what do you do if he's not responding to you and you don't know what's in that freighter?
Well, there are a number of consequence management. If the freighter is in the channel, and the freighter, make sure I understand, he is blocking the channel?
He's coming up the channel, but he won't respond to you, and you don't know what he's got in his ship. What are you going to do?
Well, there's a function of threat. If I knew of or expected a threat, we have various and sundry ways to do that. There are certainly rules of the road. There is a protection that, depending on the value of the unit that I'm dealing with, I have Coast Guard protection as well, and Coast Guard mandates and regulations.
If he rams that freighter in that channel or up against the shore, doesn't he block that channel from anybody getting in or out of that channel, as small as that channel is?
Depending on the angle, I guess it's feasible. When you say block, I'd have to look at the angle of it. There's ways to remove the ships from that channel as well.
But it would take a while to do that, wouldn't it?
It might.
Yeah. Unlike the size of the channel in Norfolk, which you still have a number of ways of getting out. I also want to go back to what we talked about in here, the other one that you're concerned with, foreign nations. I take it we weren't concerned very much about the Soviets because we didn't talk about moving the carriers during the Cold War. I would also assume we're not really worried about the Chinese because we've downgraded our intelligence priority on the Chinese now from priority 1 to priority 2, so I would take it we don't view them as a great risk. But then you also have on here terrorist. In looking at the terrorist threat, how great do you think a terrorist threat is to the Hampton Roads area?
I'm unaware of any terrorist threat to the Hampton Roads area any different from any other port that we have. So to say there is no terrorist threat would probably be inaccurate, but not necessarily different from the others at this time.
And if you moved a carrier, how would it reduce that terrorist threat?
It provides, what I do is I gain a relief of the consequences of any emerging or ultimately emerging terrorist threat. And we had 2 carrier ports during the Cold War. We had Mayport.
You've got actually 5 right now, though.
Only 1 on the East Coast.
Yeah, but you got 5.
Only 1 on the East Coast, 12,900 miles away.
Okay. If you had to do work on one of those carriers, well, I'll get back to that in a minute. Tell me how you remove the risk if I move one carrier out of the port.
Move one carrier to Mayport, you mean, sir?
Mm-hmm. How does that reduce the terrorist risk in Norfolk?
It doesn't remove the terrorist risk to Norfolk necessarily unless they are compelled to target carriers alone.
Okay. How does it protect the carrier by moving it out of, by having one home ported in Mayport?
Protect the carrier that I just moved to Mayport?
I'm just going by your EIS, which says that you're moving it because you want to reduce the risk to carriers from terrorists. That's what
by dispersing the threat, the force, then what I do is that's one way to, if you will, counter terrorist threat.
Okay, can we put up slide 7, please? You're aware, Admiral, that in the last 6 years you've only had 5 carriers together 34 days, right?
It hadn't crossed my mind until you just showed me, Congressman.
But with only 34 days, a scheduling change could keep them from all being there together too, couldn't it?
Well, it depends on the time we do. We schedule our carriers. At times they are. We have a number of carriers in Norfolk periodically.
Okay. If we're focused on the risk there, and from terrorists and from foreign nations, and if that's a major risk, what's more important, protecting the 1.7 million people in the Hampton Roads area or protecting the carrier?
I want to make sure I understand.
Let me explain it real quickly. We've got $1 billion to spend, roughly. Spend $1 billion to move a carrier or $1 billion to beef up security in Hampton Roads against terrorist attacks and other attacks there. Why are you spending $1 billion to move the carrier instead of beefing up for the terrorist attacks?
Well, Congressman, we feel pretty comfortable right now about our numbers at about $590 million to move the aircraft carrier. We've looked at that extensively. I couldn't tell you what the cost is if you say to beef up the port against a terrorist attack, because that would depend on the threat and the level to which I needed to beef up, if you will, the force.
Well, I'm saying that based on your EIS, you are saying that you're moving it to defend against terrorist attacks. And I'm asking you, if you think that's a substantial concern, why not spend that money to beef up and protect the 1.7 million people living there?
The reason we are desiring to move the carrier is to preclude the consequences of a terrorist attack, not the threat of the terrorist attack.
And tell me specifically the consequences that you're talking about to the carrier?
To the force, to the carrier force, by having a strategic dispersal like we had in the Cold War, to your earlier point.
Yeah. All right, now I want you to go back and look at what would happen. So you're concerned about the carrier, not about the industrial base around there. Is that correct?
Industrial base?
Around Norfolk. You're concerned about a terrorist attack on the carrier itself, correct?
I'm not familiar with all of the details you're quoting in the EIS. You got me on that one, Congressman.
Okay.
But we are concerned about the consequences of a terrorist attack.
All right, let me ask you just a couple more follow-up questions, and I'll be done. Explain to me, it says in the same EIS, it says every third maintenance availability would be conducted in dry dock at a nuclear-capable shipyard. CVN nuclear propulsion plant maintenance manning would be approximately 50 people with no CVN maintenance is being conducted, but it would increase by an average of 750 for a 6-month maintenance availability. Now, it's my understanding that each availability averages about 6 months. Takes about 400 men to do it. Are you going to be having those men in Mayport, women, to do the work, or are you going to have to move them to Norfolk to do the work on the availabilities that you have?
Docking availabilities will likely be done in Norfolk. That's where the carrier dock is located. As you know, we don't have that. What we call continuous maintenance, to the degree there is some nuclear maintenance involved, will be done in Mayport.
How often would you have the carrier in Mayport to do the continuous maintenance that you're talking about?
I'd have to take that for the record, Congressman. I have to look at, it would depend on where that carrier is in its rotational cycle and its fleet response plan, and how long it's been since its last docking event.
So you're saying all the maintenance, the availabilities would still be done in Norfolk?
When you said docking availabilities, that's where I believe they would be done in Norfolk. We have a, if you will, one shipyard approach. It would depend on the life cycle of the carrier. It's where that carrier would go following its, in that case, overhaul. And it would be an extended overhaul if I'm going to dock it. As you're familiar with up there in Newport News, that would be the likely location. So if for a docking availability, more than likely, yes, it would be in Norfolk area.
So if it's going to be in Norfolk, how have you reduced the risk when you're putting it in Norfolk, 6 months for each availability, and every 3 years it would be there for over 7 months to do the maintenance on it? How have you reduced the risk factor? I don't understand that.
A docking availability and an overhaul in a carrier is not done once every 6 months, every, I think you said 36 months. I'd have to look at, it depend on the carrier, its core life, and all of those. So I'd have to get back to you and lay that out as the likelihood of each of those.
Okay. Last question I want to ask you on that, and then I'll move on. You told me that you answered the chairman, said your biggest worry was the unfunded Central Command tempo that I think you said would be $400 to $500 million. I want to put slide 8 up here for you and ask you, which do you worry about more? Spending the $500 and some million that you say it would cost, almost $600 million, to move the carrier to Mayport, or doing the unfunded Navy requirements that are about $523 million? And I take it if they are requirements, they're requirements to do the mission.
I worry about the long-term strategic consequences of not having but one carrier port in the East Coast.
You think that's more important than the $523 million of unfunded requirements that you have here?
I do, yes, sir.
Okay. And you think that's more important than the unfunded requirements that your fellow vice chiefs have down for the Marine Corps, the Air Force, and the Army?
I don't want to speak for them.
I'm asking your opinion.
My opinion?
Mm-hmm.
I have what I have here, which is my concern for the strategic dispersal and the fact that I have one carrier home port on the East Coast. We consider that very high priorities.
Okay. And last slide I'll put up is slide 9, where there are a lot of people. This was Lauren Thompson testifying before the CPower subcommittee, and he said, quote, "We're spending $4 billion a day in this government that we do not have, and meanwhile our share of global GDP has fallen from 32% to 24% in one decade. So to spend that kind of money to get no additional gain in terms of military capability is bordering on scandalous." I happen to agree with him. And last question I'm going to ask, and I apologize for taking so much time. This is an important issue to many of us. General, for all three generals, do any of you know what presumptions the QDR made with regard to force readiness? In other words, did the QDR assume our forces would be 75% ready, C1 or C2, 85% ready, 100% ready? Do we have that information or not?
We know for the Army, sir, and I believe all the forces, that the QDR accepted the idea of a rotational base in our Army. We're looking at establishing that rotational base that has in it 1 Corps, 5 division headquarters, 20 brigades, and 90,000 enablers, with a strategic hedge in the train-ready force of approximately half of that. Based on going to a rotational way of providing forces to the COCOM commanders, we know we'll have a portion of the force that will be in reset coming out of that rotation. It could be as high as a third to a quarter.
General Amos, do we know what basis that we assume their forces would be on the QDR in terms of the readiness? What percentage?
Sir, to the best of my knowledge that I know of, I don't know of any presumptions in the QDR that said it assumed a certain force readiness levels. I know when we participated in it, and the Marine Corps has never been a fan of what we call tiered readiness, and where you have those 4 deployed forces that are what you would call 100% ready, and then you have the forces back home that are at a significantly less, and becomes a bathtub, and you start working your way. We're forced into that right now by virtue of the current fight in Afghanistan. So no question about it, the forces that come home are probably what we would call C3 or C4 for readiness, and that could be equipment for sure back home. We know that for a fact. And then it will be personal turnover and some of the things that General Corelli's talking about. But I'm unaware of an assumption, Congressman Forbes, of a specific readiness level as we went into the QDR.
General Chandler.
Congressman, I'm also not aware of any specific percentage. Our rotation is based on the Air Expeditionary Force, as you know. Those forces are trained and ready to go. We, like the Marine Corps, have been forced to a certain level of tiered readiness to ensure that those forces that go forward have the equipment they need and are properly trained.
Good, thank you. Now I'll just close by saying, if you would, get back to us if you do find out that there was an assumption in the QDR of any percentage of readiness. The only reason is we'd like to know what that assumption was to make sure we're there, and we funded you up to there. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
I'll go to my good friend from Mississippi, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Chiarelli, seeing as how this is an operational and maintenance hearing,